A well done visual aid can add a lot to any speech. Okay, it can help get the audience interested, it can make things clear, it can really help get them involved. However, the exact opposite is true. A poorly done visual aid can actually be a severe detriment to your speech, as people may spend, for example, more time trying to figure out what this thing is trying to show than they are paying attention to you. So, what visual aids should do and what are some of the main types that you should think about using, that is the subject of this video. All right, so using visual aids. Admittedly, this is one of my pet peeves. And that's just me, but I really tend to notice visual aids because a lot of people do it poorly. And I will fully admit, before I got really involved in public speaking and had to give a lot of presentations, I did it poorly. I just didn't know I was doing it poorly till after the fact. So let's talk a little about what visual aids are and why we use them. So first and foremost, what is the purpose of having a visual aid? Okay, any visual aid you use needs to serve a purpose. It doesn't just exist for itself, okay? It needs to serve a purpose. And there's a couple of primary purposes a visual aid should serve. First, clarity. If there is something in your speech that you think your audience might not fully understand or get, and a visual aid, poster, little video clip, whatever, can help clarify it, that's a good opportunity to use a visual aid well. Also, increasing interest. We are a visual culture, okay? I mean, there's a reason why YouTube, Twitter, and movies and TV and streaming are as popular as they are. So a visual aid helps bring in those other senses a bit and can help increase the audience's attention in whatever it is you're talking about. And as such, it can also help the audience retain information. When they have auditory and visual to combine together to help remember something, that can make your speech more effective and make them, as audience members, more likely to remember the information. It can also enhance your credibility. A well-done visual aid shows you spent time, and on putting it together and getting it into your speech. And that implicitly tells your audience you care because you put the time in to make this visual aid well and to use it effectively. So it can help enhance your credibility. And in persuasive context, it can also make it much more persuasive. You think back, I don't know about you all, but I had to take driver's ed in high school, and I, to this day, still remember the video they showed us about don't drink and drive because of all the pictures in it of accidents. Those made more of a lasting impression on me than just saying it's dangerous ever could. So the point being, when you're going to use a visual aid in a speech, minimally, it should do one of these 5 things. Okay, if you have a visual aid and it doesn't do one of these 5, then why is it there? Okay, so now really, really good visual aids do multiples of them, but minimally they need to do one of these 5 things. So always be asking yourself, which one of these purposes does my visual aid serve? But what can you use for a visual aid? What kinds of visual aids are there? Well, there's several different ones. And here again, one's not better than the other. They're just different, okay? And you may very well find that certain mediums, certain circumstances, one type of visual aid might work better than another, all right? So let's go over these. So first, objects and models. If you are discussing an object and you can get it in the room, then using that object is perfectly legit, all right? To show things like scale for people to see what it actually is, but you need to keep in mind an object's limitation. Like let's say, for example, I was going to give a speech about how to use an iPhone. Well, I couldn't really get up in front of you and go, here's an iPhone, and this is how you use it. You can't really see what I'm doing. It's not going to work. Now, it might be beneficial at some point to go, this is an iPhone. This is what it looks like. So people have an idea in context and as far as size, what one looks like. And that's clarity. But then demonstrating how to do the stuff on that's not going to work, all right? And sometimes it's just not logistically possible. Like, true story, when I was getting my master's at the University of Wyoming and I was teaching this class, I had a student who wanted to do her informative speech on how to saddle a horse. She grew up on a ranch and was on actually the University of Wyoming's rodeo team, and asked if she could bring her horse to class. I said no. There's some logistical issues with that. But I suggested she bring a model. And in cases where the actual object won't work or it's too small to illustrate something, bringing in a model can be a great standpoint. In this student's case, as I told you, she was on the rodeo team. They have these practice cows, and it's basically a big oil drum that they put wooden pegs in, and they put like a little other jar on it with horns, and they practice roping it. You may have seen it in movies. She brought one of those in and saddled that, and it worked perfectly well. So in cases where a model might be more effective for showing parts, or it's just logistically not possible to bring the object in, model's a good way to go. Another type of visual aid that you can use are photos and drawings. Now, some things with photos and drawings. You need to be sure they're big enough for the audience to see. Because again, we're a visual culture, so having a photo or a drawing of something can be great, but it needs to be big enough for people to see it. That's why we're going to recommend you put them in PowerPoint. But what you want to always remember is avoid passing things out to the audience during your speech. And I will say, even before your speech. Now, you've probably seen people do this all the time. I know, I used to do it. Don't. All right? Now, why is that? Well, let's just think. Imagine yourself in a class. I'm up here talking about something, and I go, here's a picture of whatever. I'm going to pass it around, and I hand it to the first student in the first row. Now, there's 30 students in the class, all right? So I give it to the first student, and I keep talking, and that student looks and passes it on. How many students is it going to get to while I'm still talking about it? 3, 4, maybe 5 tops. That means for the other 25, when they get the thing to look at it, it's totally irrelevant to whatever I'm talking about at the time, which means they have to quit paying attention, look at this thing, remember what it was supposed to be about, pass it on, which just causes distraction, and then try to focus back. It's never a good idea. And if you give people things before you start talking, very often that just leads to... How many of y'all been handed a handout at the beginning of class or something like that, and you wound up like 5 minutes into class doodling on it? Or you quit listening and started flipping through those pages? If you do it, you can't expect your audience to be different, all right? It's fine to give people stuff after you're done. That's perfectly fine. I do that all the time. But don't pass things out to the audience beforehand or during your speech. It's just a distraction. What's best for if you want to show a photo or a drawing is to put it in PowerPoint, even if it's just one PowerPoint slide, because then it can be projected up and it's big enough, everybody can see it. And what I always do is I put in blank slides like before and after the picture, so I can bring up the blank slide, have it up there, show the picture, and then when I'm done, move to the next slide that's blank and just move on. That way they're not keeping looking at the picture when I'm not talking about it anymore. Now, those work with photos, but what are drawings good for? We can all think of pictures that might work well, but what about drawings? Well, drawings can be really good at illustrating something that is either very difficult or impossible to take a picture of. And here you have an example. This is a drawing that's seeking to illustrate what somebody with dyslexia sees when they try to read. Now, I am dyslexic myself. I was diagnosed in 4th grade. And I can tell you from personal experience, that's accurate. That when my symptoms are really bad, even today, that is what happens. But you can't take a picture of that, all right? It's not going to work. So a drawing can be very effective for those type of things or that type of information. But again, big enough people can see, don't pass it around. Another type of drawing that people often use are graphs. Now, what graphs are is they are pictures that show statistical trends. And the reason why this is so effective and why you want to use graphs when you give a lot of statistics, most people don't like math. And if you throw a truck ton of numbers at them, they're going to have a very hard time remembering them and keeping them all straight. It goes to that attention and interest component. But if you pair telling them these numbers with a graph, that helps them remember it, because they might not remember the exact numbers, but what they can do is remember what that graph looked like and remember what it was illustrating, and that can help them remember the information. So what are the different types of graphs you can use? Well, there's 3 primary types. The first one is a line graph. You have lines going across the screen, whatever. Line graphs are really good for example, showing a statistical trend over time. Like if you wanted to, for example, show the average grade of students in a class on a test, you could maybe get a graph of that over like 7 semesters, and it could see how it was doing, if it was skewing or whatnot. It'd be good for showing that. So trends over time, line graphs are good for. Another type of graph is a pie graph. And I'm sure you all know what these are. A big circle has slices cut out of it. What pie graphs are good for is showing a population distribution, showing how people in a population break into certain categories. We tend to get a series of these at Gateway at the beginning of each new academic year about the incoming, if you will, freshman class. That shows we get several of them, shows like what county in our service area they're coming from, what their declared major is, what different types of financial aid there are, how many are full-time versus part-time, how many are taking all face-to-face, all online, or a mix. All these various things. And they're really good snapshots that you can see a population distribution, and that's what they're good for. And then lastly, we have a bar graph. And what bar graphs are good for is showing differences between 2 or 3 categories. So very common one that we have in education is, let's say you want to look at the difference in between males and females in things in going to college, as far as in average GPA, declared major, how many are on financial aid, how many are choosing to live in the dorm versus off campus. You could do those measurements and you can illustrate them in a bar graph. Typically, each of the different bars is different colors, and so you can do that. But they're really good for showing those differences between 2 or 3 population groups across several different subject areas. So that's what graphs are good for. Now, another type of drawing you can use is a chart. Now, charts are good for summarizing a large block of information. Okay, so let's say you wanted to show, I think an example from your textbook is, what region of the world legal immigrants from the U.S. come from. And you may have, this area, like Asia, this percent, Europe, this percent, Africa, this percent, whatever, all down. It might be good to show that information so you can reference back to it and people can have it in context. So charts are good for that. However, you need to keep in mind the golden rule, which is to keep it simple, stupid, that old acronym of KISS, because you can make a chart so complex that it basically shows nothing. Okay, and let me give you an example. See that? All right, now I didn't make this up. This is the official chart from the U.S. Department of Defense outlining our war strategy when we were at war in Afghanistan. That strategy was called Coin Dynamics, all right? That's what you're seeing. And here's all the various things that were on this chart. And this was one chart. I personally served in the Marines right out of high school. I was not in during the Afghan war, but I had friends who were. People I went to college with who were in ROTC, who were officers who I kept in touch with. And they had to sit through hours of briefings on this chart. I mean, this chart's a mess. Can you all make out what it is? Yeah, me neither. There's way too much stuff here to be effective. So if you're going to use a chart, remember it's good for summarizing info, but you want to keep it simple. So that's objects, models, photos, and drawings. What else do we have? Video. Now, video can be great. As I said, we are a visual culture, okay? So video can work great, but you want to keep some things in mind. Number one, keep the video short. If you have a 10-minute speech, don't show an 8-minute video, all right? Now, the rule for this class is you cannot have more than 1 minute of video in any of your speeches count towards your time, all right? Maybe you need to show 1.5 minutes of video. Okay, fine, but only the first minute will count towards your time. So just keep that in mind going forward. Make sure you have the video, but you know what you need to show and you have it ready to go. So before you ever start talking, cue it up before you begin your speech. Something I've often had students do in class is they get to show a video and they'll walk over to the computer during their speech and try to pull up YouTube and find it. And that's just wasting time. And then inevitably they can't find it or things have changed. Cue it up before you start and do a few other things. Don't only find the video, hit play. Why do you want to do that? Well, number one, you make sure the audio is working. You don't want to start showing a video and there be no sound. Because then you're like, and then you have to start narrating it on the spot. So hit play, make sure it plays, that everybody can hear it quickly, fine. Also, particularly if you're using a video online, you want to hit play beforehand so that any ads that will come up, you can go ahead and get through them. All right. For example, you don't want to be giving a speech about the horrors of puppy mills and have the audience all set up to see this video about horrible puppy mills, and you go and hit play, and we have to sit through 30 seconds of a Swiffer sweeper ad. That just totally destroyed that foundation you were building for this video. So cue it up, make sure the sound works, get through any ads, and have it ready to go before you ever start talking. You also want to be sure it is integrated into the speech. You don't want to, here's my speech, yada, 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 you know, and that's why we ought to do this. Thank you. Now that my speech is done, let me show you a video. No, it needs to be part of the speech. Now, if you want to use a video as part of an attention getter, that's one thing. But outside of that, it needs to be part of the speech where you get to it, show it, explain its impacts. It needs to be integrated into the speech, not just this side thing that happens. You also want to avoid low resolution. Now, this has gotten a whole lot easier since the explosion of things like YouTube and whatnot. But if it's really grainy and hard to see, just don't use it, especially in classrooms, because it's going to be hard for students to see. Stay away from it. And when you show a video, make sure it's on full screen if at all possible. This is especially true for videos online, right? If you're going to show, and I'll just use YouTube as an example. If you're going to show a YouTube example, make that video full screen before you play it. Now, there's nothing wrong if you have the screen on behind you and keeping it minimized. And when you get to it, simply walking up, pulling it up, make it full screen, and then hitting play. Nobody's going to be upset about that, all right? Because it was all ready to go. You just had to pull it up and maximize it. Why do you want to show it full screen? One, so people can see it better. But two, it also reduces distractions. I mean, think about this. How many of y'all ever been at home and you pulled up a YouTube video to watch and you're watching it and then it has all those other videos on the side and you're like, oh, what's that? Ooh, what's that? Ooh, and you start clicking on other things? Those other videos distract you? Again, if it happens to you, you can't expect it not to happen to your audience. They're people just like you. So making it full screen helps prevent that. So good things with video, just make sure it's cued beforehand, make sure everything's working, show full screen, and you'll be good. So that's objects, models, photos, drawings, and video. What else can you use? You can use yourself as a speaker. Okay, you can use yourself as a visual aid. Now, how can this work? Well, typically you use yourself as a visual aid if you're trying to demonstrate something. Some examples in class, I've had students who have shown how to make something, all right? Like I've had one student do basic pottery. I had another student show how to whittle, how to make a very simple dish. I've had several who used to be in our cosmetology program that did like how to cut hair. And they use themselves or another actual person to do it. And that's fine. That can work perfectly well. Under a couple of circumstances. One, if you're going to use yourself, it needs to be when you're speaking in a smaller environment. Like a classroom, a standard size 30-person classroom's fine. But if you want to demonstrate using yourself in front of 2,000 people in an auditorium and there's no cameras, that's not going to work. People in the back can't see. But in more intimate settings, it works fine. The big thing is you want to be sure that you practice it ahead of time to really have your words and your movements coordinated. You don't want to just wing it when you get there because that can lead to problems. So what other kinds of visual aids do we have? Well, PowerPoint. PowerPoint gets a bad rap. Okay, PowerPoint can be incredibly effective, and I like to use it a lot. The problem is it's probably one of the most abused type of visual aids out there. All right, you ever heard of the thing death by PowerPoint? Yeah. All right, so you want to think about PowerPoint when you use it, and you want to use it strategically, okay? You don't want to just have everything there just cuz. Remember, the point of a PowerPoint and any visual aid is not to replace you. It is to enhance your message. You are the speaker. That's your visual aid. Okay. Now there should be another video with this. There's a great video out there by a gentleman named David Day-P. Phillips, who there's a video I think should be linked within the module where he gives a great TED talk about good PowerPoint presentation. And I highly, highly, highly recommend that you watch that. So again, it's not there to overpower the presentation. It's there to enhance it. And when you're showing a PowerPoint, don't read from the screen. Don't be going, so we need to see the thing here. We do this and that. No. Keep your audience focused. What I tend to do when I use PowerPoints is I print it out. I typically use the slide feature where it prints like 6 slides on a page. And I have that in front of me so I know what the slide, I might do a quick glance just to make sure it's on the right slide. But outside of that, I'm focusing on the audience. Okay, don't read from the screen. Audiences hate that, all right? So, do we have any other types? Not really. All right. These are your main types: objects, models, photos and drawings, video, yourself, and PowerPoint. Others are combinations of these various things, but these are your main ones. All right. So think about those uses of visual aids, the clarity, retention, interest, that stuff, and think about what in my speech, what points, what concepts can benefit from a visual aid in using one of those various reasons why we want to have a visual aid. And then think about which one of these kinds is the best way to do that. Not just as far as what's the best way in general, but what's the best way to do it. Not only that matches what I need, but also works with the audience and the setting and any type of technological limitations that you may be dealing with. So visual aids are a great way to enhance your speech. It can really help you get the audience's attention and interest and keep it, but only when it's done effectively. So think about these different kinds of visual aids and what you need them for, and that match of need and kind of aid and situation can make for an outstanding visual aid, which can radically help improve the overall effectiveness of your speech.